14 dishes, 25 guests, a start time of 5 o'clock in the morning, and at the bottom of it, in place of a please, in place of a question, in place of anything a person might say to another person they claim to love, the kitchen is yours. My wife read it standing at the counter, with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She didn't say a word. She just turned the phone around and held it out to me, the way you hand someone an X-ray, when the thing on it speaks for itself, and there is no point in narrating. I spent 32 years in construction management, and the one skill I've never been able to switch off is reading a structure. Which walls carry the load? Which ones are decorative? Which ones are about to come down and take the ceiling with them? I did not expect to need that skill at my own son's Thanksgiving table. Before I take you back 3 weeks, let me say this. If this is your first time here, take a second to hit like and subscribe, and drop your city and the time where you are down in the comments. I read every single one. It matters to me that you're here. Now, let me tell you about the woman who was standing at that counter, because you need to understand who she is before you understand what was taken from her. Her name is Diane. We have been married 34 years. She taught second grade for 28 of them at Fairview Elementary. Same school, same grade, same room number for most of her career, which tells you something about the kind of person she is. She knew every child's name by the second day. Not the second week, the second day. She remembered them years later. What they struggled with, what made them light up, which ones needed patience, and which ones needed to be challenged before they went dull from boredom. She is the most capable person I have ever known. She is also, and I say this now with a full accounting of what it cost her, a woman who spent her entire life making things easy for other people. That is a beautiful quality and a dangerous one. The world has a way of noticing which people won't say no, and then quietly organizing itself around that fact. Our son Nathan is 34. He grew up steady and careful. He became a structural engineer, which suits him. He measures twice. He builds things meant to outlast him. I am proud of him the way a father is proud when a son turns out to be a genuinely good man, which is a different and rarer thing than a successful one. Nathan met Renee 3 years ago and married her a year after that. Small wedding in their backyard, white roses, 40 people. Diane stayed up 2 nights that week, hemming the linen tablecloths Renee had ordered online because they arrived 4 inches too long. I offered to help. Diane said she had it. That was Diane. That has always been Diane. I liked Renee well enough at the start. She was sharp and organized. She had opinions about everything, and no shyness about sharing them. Those aren't bad qualities. I've hired men for less. The problem, and it took me longer than it should have to name it out loud, was that Renee's opinions about the world frequently included opinions about what Diane should be doing. And the way she voiced them left no room in the sentence for the answer to be anything other than yes. I noticed. I said something to Diane once early on. She told me I was being protective. She wasn't wrong. Neither was I. The pattern started small. They always do. Nobody ever hands you the whole thing at once. They hand it to you one reasonable piece at a time until you're carrying something you never agreed to carry. 14 months into the marriage, Renee's birthday. A Wednesday text to Diane, "Hey Mom. Nathan and I are thinking low-key birthday dinner Saturday, his family, maybe 12 people. Your pot roast would be so perfect for it. Read that sentence again and find the question in it. There isn't one. No, would you be willing? No, only if you have time. Just the assumption, already dressed and standing at the door with its coat on." Diane made the pot roast. She also made scalloped potatoes, a green salad, and a chocolate layer cake from scratch, because she had heard Renee mention once, months earlier, in passing, that chocolate cake was her favorite. That is who my wife is. She listens, and then she acts, and she does not make a production out of either. Nobody said thank you after dinner. Renee posted photographs of the table that night. The pot roast did not appear in a single one of them. 4 months later, they went to Cabo for 10 days. Nathan texted me on a Thursday asking if Duke could stay with us starting Sunday. Of course, I said. We like Duke. But I noticed it was Thursday and they were leaving Sunday, and this was the first we had heard of it. I brought it up with Diane that night. She shrugged and said it was fine. I said it's not about whether it's fine. It's about how she asks. Diane looked at me the way she sometimes did, patient, a little tired. The look that meant I know, Walter, but let's not make it a thing. I let it go. I should not have let it go. That was the moment to say something, to Nathan, to Renee, to somebody. Instead, I folded. The exact same folding I had been quietly criticizing my wife for. I want that on the record before I ask you to judge anyone else in this story. I saw the wall going crooked, and I said nothing because saying something would have been uncomfortable. And comfort is the cheapest thing a man can buy with his silence. That's on me. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, on a Tuesday evening, I was watching the news in the living room when Diane came in from the kitchen holding her phone. She didn't say anything. She just held it out. 2 turkeys, combined weight over 20 pounds, stuffing from scratch, 8 pounds of mashed potatoes. Green bean casserole, sweet potatoes with a brown sugar pecan topping, cranberry sauce, fresh not canned, homemade dinner rolls. Gravy, corn pudding, Brussels sprouts, pecan pie, pumpkin pie, apple crisp, a cheese board for arrivals, 14 items. Below the list, 25 guests confirmed. Start time 5 a.m. The kitchen is yours. I set the phone down on the coffee table. Then I picked it up again and read that last line one more time, because I wanted to be certain I hadn't invented the tone. Not our kitchen. Not would you mind? Not I know this is a lot. Tell me what you need. Just, the kitchen is yours. The way a project manager confirms a vendor. The way you'd write to someone whose labor you have already priced and purchased. I looked at Diane. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, not angry, not yet, just very still, in the particular way she got still when she was deciding whether a thing was as bad as it looked. It was as bad as it looked. I'll call Nathan, I said. No, she said it quietly, but there was nothing soft in it. Let me handle it first. She picked up her phone and typed, that's a lot for one person. Maybe we can split some of the dishes? Renee's reply came back in under 2 minutes. Oh, Mom, you've done it before. You're so much better at this than any of us. We'll be running around getting everything else set up. Diane read it. She set the phone face down on the counter, screen to the wood, the way you put down something you have finished with. I sat in that living room and made myself stay quiet, but I was already thinking. 32 years of job sites teaches a man that the loudest response is almost never the effective one. You don't shout at a failing structure. You get the people out, and then you decide what comes down. 2 Sundays before Thanksgiving, Nathan had the family over for a casual dinner. Pizza, a bagged salad, nothing Renee had cooked. I'll give her that much. She never once pretended to be something she wasn't in a kitchen. The pretending was reserved for other rooms of the house. After dinner, while Alicia, Renee's younger sister, was in the middle of a story, Diane found a pause and turned to her daughter-in-law. I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, Diane said. Maybe Alicia could handle a couple of the sides, or we could order the pies from Miller's Bake Shop. They do a wonderful pecan, Renee laughed. It was a particular kind of laugh, warm across the surface, entirely decided underneath. The laugh of someone who has already filed your suggestion. Mom. She reached over and patted Diane's hand. That's literally what you're good at. Don't overthink it. It's always so beautiful when you do it. Alicia nodded. Marcus, Alicia's boyfriend, looked at his phone. And my son looked at his pizza. I watched Nathan look at a slice of pizza and say nothing. Not one word. I taught that boy to speak up when something was wrong. I taught him that silence in the face of unfairness is not neutrality, that it is its own kind of answer, and that everyone in the room hears it. He had apparently set that lesson down somewhere between his 20s, and now, the way a man sets down a toolbox he doesn't expect to need again. I kept my face still. I learned a long time ago, in project meetings, and on scaffolding, and in rooms where the wrong word costs money, that showing anger before you have decided what to do with it is a waste of anger. Anger is a resource. Spend it on the load-bearing problem. On the drive home, I said, "That's not happening." Diane looked out the window at the dark going by. 25 people alone, 5 in the morning, no. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, and then, I already have a plan." I looked at her. Under the passing streetlights, she was almost smiling. "Tell me," I said. That night she called Joe Marsh. Joe had been Diane's closest friend since their first year teaching together at Fairview. 22 years of the particular intimacy that grows between two people who have shared a faculty lounge, a profession, and more difficult parent conferences than either could count. Joe retired to Sarasota 4 years ago. Diane talked to her every Thursday morning over video, coffee in hand on both ends. 2,000 miles collapsed into a countertop. I sat in the kitchen while Diane was on the phone in the bedroom. When she came out 20 minutes later, her face was different. Settled, the look of a decision that has already finished happening and is only now being announced. She sat down across from me and put both hands flat on the table. "Joe invited us for Thanksgiving," she said. "Her back porch, her grandmother's roast chicken with lemon and garlic. Just the 3 of us." I said, "I'm in." She looked at me, just like that. "Diane." I folded my hands. "Our daughter-in-law sent you a work order." Our son watched her do it and said nothing. "Joe is offering you a back porch in Florida." I paused. "What exactly is the decision here?" She exhaled, a long, slow release of something that had been held for weeks. Then she pulled the yellow legal pad across the table, picked up a pen and wrote a few lines. She folded the paper once and set it beside her coffee cup. Then she opened the laptop. I watched her find the airline's website. I watched her find the 6:05 departure out of Dayton on Thanksgiving morning. 2 tickets, Tampa. She looked up at me. I nodded once. She pressed confirm. The texts kept coming all that week. Monday, just a reminder, rolls have to be homemade. Store-bought always tastes like cardboard, lol. Wednesday, hey mom, scratch pie crust? The frozen kind gets soggy. I found a great tutorial if you need it. Friday, one more thing, fresh cranberry sauce please, not the can. Charles and Denise are foodies and I want everything elevated. Charles and Denise, the first time those names had ever appeared. I asked Diane who they were. She said Nathan's boss and his wife. I sat with that for a long moment, the way you sit with a load calculation that has just come back wrong. This Thanksgiving, the one with the 14-item list and the 5 a.m. start time, and the 25 confirmed guests, was not a family dinner. It had never been a family dinner. It was a professional showcase. Renee wanted to impress the man who signed her husband's paychecks, and she had decided, without asking, without so much as a courtesy, that my wife's hands would be the instrument she used to do it. Every text arrived with no please in it and total certainty behind it. Diane answered each one with a single word. "Okay." I asked her once if that was wise. "I'm not stringing her along," she said. "I'm just not arguing with someone who isn't listening." I had been married to that woman for 34 years. I knew her particular quality of calm when she had committed fully to a course of action. It was the same calm she used on a furious parent in a school hallway at 3:15 in the afternoon. Patient, clear-eyed, done negotiating. The boarding passes were printed and sitting in the dish on my nightstand next to my wallet and my keys. 2 passes. Seats 14A and 14B, 6:05 in the morning. 10 days out, we were already gone in every way that mattered. The only thing left to resolve was the timing. 8 days before Thanksgiving, Diane drove over to Nathan's house to return a spare key that no longer fit their new locks. She came home 30 minutes later and sat down at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. I know that look. I've known it for 3 decades. What happened? I said. Door was unlocked, she said. She had stepped inside to leave the key on the entry table and heard Renee upstairs on the phone. Not shouting, just talking, in the loose, unguarded voice people use when they believe the house is empty. Charles is definitely coming. Him and Denise, the Pattersons, people from Nathan's firm. I just need to look amazing. Mom's handling all the food, so that part's covered. Mom's handling all the food. That part's covered. I sat back in my chair. There is a term in construction for a wall that looks structural but isn't. A partition. Something put up to define a space without holding anything at all. You don't know it's false until you start pulling it apart and the ceiling doesn't move. That is what this was. Renee had built a Thanksgiving that looked like a family gathering, but was, in fact, a staged professional impression. And the one element she had decided was genuinely load-bearing, the thing she had counted on completely and never once asked for, was my wife. Diane finally took off her coat, hung it on the back of the chair, and looked at me. She doesn't think we'll actually do it, she said. She thinks I'll show up at 5 in the morning because I always have. I said, then Thanksgiving is going to be very educational for her. Diane almost smiled. I got up and put the kettle on. 6 days before Thanksgiving, I called Nathan myself. Diane had asked me not to. She had already spoken to him directly, and it hadn't moved anything. But I am his father, and there are things a man needs to hear in his father's voice, especially the things he doesn't want to hear. He picked up on the second ring. I kept it short. Nathan, your mother has been handed a 14-dish list for 25 people. No help. 5A. Start. She told you it was too much. You told her to do it anyway. I need you to fix that. A pause. Dad, I know, but Mel's already got everything, Nathan. Another pause. It's just this one time, he said. I have been on enough job sites to know exactly what it sounds like when a man is repeating words that were handed to him. Those were not my son's words. They were preloaded and waiting in his mouth. I said, I'm telling you clearly. Your mother is not going to be the catering for your wife's networking dinner. Figure it out. He said, Dad, I really think I love you. Good night, I said, and I hung up. Diane was at the kitchen table when I came back in. She looked up and read my face in about a second and a half, which is what 34 years buys you. Well, she said. He's not ready to hear it yet. He will be, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she stood, went to the hall closet, reached up to the top shelf, and came back carrying her suitcase. She set it on the bed. She looked at it for a moment. Then she started to pack. Before I tell you what happened on Thanksgiving morning, let me ask you something. Have you ever told someone a hard truth, a real one, said plainly with love, and watched them decide not to hear it? Drop a word in the comments if you know that particular silence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because what comes next is the part nobody saw coming. Least of all her, I want to tell you about an apron. Navy canvas, heavy duty, from a kitchen supply store we wandered into on a day trip years ago. I bought it because I liked the weight of it and the depth of the pockets. I wore it every Saturday morning when I made my Dutch apple pancakes. Nathan still talked about those pancakes, which I took a certain quiet satisfaction in. A man's legacy is mostly small and mostly breakfast. The apron hung inside the pantry door. There was a smear of dried flour near the pocket I had never gotten around to washing out. The night before Thanksgiving, while Diane was packing, I went into the kitchen. I'm not entirely sure what I was looking for. Something to do with my hands, probably. I took the apron down and held it. I thought about all the Thanksgivings I had stood at that stove with her. 30-some years of them. She ran the operation. I was support staff, and I accepted that division cheerfully, because I knew my limits. I have never once chopped an onion to any standard she would recognize as an onion. But I could stand next to her for 6 hours. I could hand her things. I could make her laugh at 7 in the morning with my hands full of celery. I could make absolutely certain that she was not alone in that room. That was the thing Renee missed entirely. She thought she was requisitioning labor. She never understood that what she was actually stripping out of that kitchen was the company. The standing next to, the 30 years of two people in one room working. I folded the apron along its old creases and hung it back on the hook. It didn't need to come to Florida. It belonged here. But it would not be used this Thanksgiving. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to the bedroom, where Diane had already set my suitcase open on the bed, half filled with my things. She knew me well enough to start without me. She has always known me well enough to start without me. When I finished packing, I came back to the kitchen and found her sitting at the table. The yellow legal pad was in front of her. She had written on it days earlier, 4 sentences, folded once, sitting there the whole week, like something that had already made up its mind and was simply waiting for the calendar to catch up. She unfolded it now and smoothed it flat with her palm. I read it over her shoulder. "Nathan, I love you. That hasn't changed and it won't. But I am not able to cook Thanksgiving dinner for 25 people alone." I said so, and no one heard me. "We're going to see Joe. We'll be back Sunday. The kitchen is yours, Mom and Dad." She had already added, and Dad at the bottom, in different ink, days ago. I hadn't asked her to. She hadn't asked me either. After 34 years, some things get signed before they get discussed. She set the note in the center of the table. Then she reached up to the cabinet above the sink and took down the small glass she uses every morning for orange juice. Plain, nothing special, a juice glass, and placed it over the note as a weight. We stood there together in that kitchen for a moment. The light on, the house quiet. "We're going to hear about this," I said. "Yes," she said. "Nathan's going to be upset." Yes. I looked at her. 34 years, and she still had a way of looking back at me that carried more than most people can fit into a paragraph. "You ready?" I said. "I've been ready for about 2 weeks," she said. I turned off the kitchen light. She carried her suitcase to the door. I carried mine. We called the car together, standing side by side in the hallway in the dark, and waited. The driver did not ask where we were going at 4 in the morning, which suited us fine. He had a low radio playing and the heat turned up. And Diane sat next to me in the back seat, with her hands folded in her lap, in the perfect stillness of a person who has made her decision and is now simply letting it happen to the world. The airport at 4:30 on Thanksgiving morning has a specific quality. Not empty, suspended. Like the building is holding its breath between one day and the next. I bought us 2 coffees from a vending machine that were aggressively, almost impressively bad. We drank them anyway. Diane's phone had 3 unread messages from Renee, sent the night before. Reminders, instructions, emoji. Neither of us opened them. At 5:40 they called our boarding group. We stood in the line and I thought, right now, 25 people believe there is a Thanksgiving dinner being prepared for them. In a few hours, someone is going to walk into a kitchen and find a note under a juice glass. My phone buzzed as we stepped into the jetway. "Nathan, hey Dad, swinging by to get you and Mom around 7. Mel wants her there by 8 to start. See you soon." He didn't know yet. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. We found our seats, 14A and 14B. Diane took the window. The plane pushed back at 6. 2 minutes late, which felt entirely appropriate for a family that had spent 3 weeks being told to be on time. When the wheels left the ground, Diane reached over and put her hand on mine. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Joe Marsh was waiting at Tampa Arrivals with 2 paper cups of real coffee and absolutely no dramatic reaction whatsoever, which is exactly what you want from a friend of 22 years. She hugged Diane first, then she looked at me. "Walter, you came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought Diane might talk you out of it on the way." "She tried," I said. Diane looked at me. Once I added, "We drove to Sarasota with the windows cracked. The air was warm in a way that November in Ohio makes you forget is even possible. Salt, green, something flowering that I couldn't name and didn't need to. After 30-some years in the Midwest, it felt like a different planet with a better contractor." Joe's house was small and white, with bougainvillea climbing the mailbox post, deep pink, almost aggressive about it. A gray cat named Murray acknowledged our arrival from the couch and returned to his nap, having concluded that we were not an emergency. We took our coffees to the back porch. It faced a small inlet that caught the morning light in long, flat pieces. A pelican sat on a dock post across the water, doing nothing at all with complete authority. Diane's phone lit up on the table. Nathan, then Renee, then Alicia's number. I turned it face down. Joe looked at me. "You know it won't stop." "It'll stop when it stops," I said. She handed me more coffee. I sat back and looked at the water and thought, somewhere in Ohio right now there is a kitchen with a note in it and no turkey. And here I am on a warm porch, with my wife watching a pelican go absolutely nowhere. Some problems solve themselves. Some problems, it turns out, were never yours to begin with. They only felt like yours because you were the one who always picked them up. Nathan told us the rest of it later, in pieces over several days. I'll tell you what I know. At 7:58 that morning, Renee came downstairs in a new linen apron. Striped, artisan, bought specifically for the morning prep photograph she had planned. She had a vision for the content, the golden kitchen light, the flower on the counter, the beginning of something spectacular. The kitchen was dark and cold. No Diane, no Walter, no turkey on the counter, no prep work, no smell of anything at all. Just the table, and on it a glass, and under the glass a folded piece of yellow paper. She picked it up. She read it. Nathan came downstairs 2 minutes later and found her standing exactly where she had stopped, still holding the note, not moving. He read it. He told me. Later he stood there for 30 seconds without saying a word. I've thought about those 30 seconds more than any other detail in this story. That's the sound of a structure settling. That's what it sounds like when a man finally feels the weight of the thing he has been standing on and never once looked down at. Then he called me. I did not answer. He called Diane. No answer. He called my cell again. Then he texted. Then he tried the house line, on the off chance we had left our phones behind and were sitting at home in the dark like 2 people waiting to be collected. Then he called Alicia. Alicia arrived at 8:15, still in her coat. Renee said, "Can you cook a turkey?" Alicia said, "Mel, I have never cooked a turkey in my life." Marcus offered to look it up online. Nobody took him up on it. Meanwhile, 25 people confirmed. The centerpiece flowers had been delivered the day before. Charles and Denise Whitfield had accepted the invitation within 20 minutes of receiving it. In Sarasota, I was watching a pelican. The clock in Nathan's kitchen read 8:32, 6.5 hours to dinner. By 9 o'clock, Renee had called 4 restaurants. The first had stopped taking Thanksgiving orders in October. The second offered a packaged holiday dinner that required 72 hours' notice. The third didn't answer. The fourth, the Oak and Ember, a place she had bookmarked out of a food magazine months earlier, was fully booked for dine-in with no takeout available on the holiday. She hung up on the fourth one without saying goodbye. Nathan drove to the grocery store at 9:30. The Thanksgiving section, an entire aisle 2 weeks earlier, was down to 3 frozen birds. The largest was 18 pounds and needed 3 to 4 days in a refrigerator to thaw safely, which is a sentence that means, in practical terms, no. He stood in the freezer aisle with a shopping cart and no good options. My son, the structural engineer, the man who measures twice, standing in a fluorescent aisle at 9:30 on Thanksgiving morning, discovering what happens when you build something on an assumption you never verified. He came home with 4 rotisserie chickens from the deli counter, 2 boxes of instant mashed potato flakes, a bag of frozen dinner rolls, a pecan pie in a plastic clamshell, a pumpkin pie from the bakery case with a small dent in the box, a wedge of brie and a sleeve of crackers. He had remembered at the last possible moment that Renee had mentioned a cheese board. Alicia tried to make the green bean casserole from a recipe on her phone. She got a call and forgot to set a timer. The kitchen smelled like burned onions for the rest of the afternoon. At 1:30, the guests began arriving. Charles Whitfield and his wife Denise came in at 1:45, precisely on time. The punctuality of people attending a work-adjacent event who have already calculated exactly how long they intend to stay. Charles wore a blazer. Denise brought a bottle of wine and handed it to Renee at the door with a smile that gave nothing away. The table, I'm told, looked beautiful. Renee has a real eye for arrangement. I have never disputed that, and I won't start now. The linen cloth, the white and amber centerpiece, taper candles at every setting. She had put genuine care into how it looked. Then the food came out. 4 rotisserie chickens on her good china platters, instant mashed potatoes with a faint gray tint under the candlelight. Frozen rolls, still cool in the middle, the pecan pie on a cake stand, the plastic clamshell nowhere to be seen, but its ridged impression still faintly printed into the crust like a fingerprint at a scene. Denise Whitfield looked at the spread, set her wineglass down carefully, and said nothing. Renee smiled at the table and said, "We had a last-minute change of plans." My in-laws weren't feeling well. Charles nodded. "That's too bad," he said. And in the kitchen, my son stood at the counter with his back to the room. He had asked his mother to cook for 25 people alone. She had told him plainly that it was too much. He had said, "Can you just do this one thing?" Standing there, looking at 4 grocery store chickens laid out on his wife's good china, Nathan understood in his body, the way things land when they finally stop bouncing off the surface of you, what one thing had actually meant. Meanwhile, Joe's grandmother's roast chicken with lemon and garlic was everything she had promised. Crisp skin, deeply fragrant, cooked with the kind of attention that makes simple food taste like a decision rather than a default. We had it with real mashed potatoes, buttered, lumpy in the good way. A salad out of Joe's garden. A white wine that turned out considerably better than its price had any right to suggest. We ate outside. The afternoon light on the inlet had shifted from the sharp brightness of morning into something amber and low, the sun easing down toward the palms on the far bank. Murray had migrated from the couch to the doorway and occupied the threshold with the self-possession of a cat, who considers all boundaries advisory. I was telling Joe about a bridge repair I had retired off of the previous spring, straightforward job, terrible weather for 6 weeks straight, when Diane's phone rang on the table between us. "Renee." Diane looked at the phone, then at me, then at Joe. Joe looked at her chicken. Diane picked up. "Mom." Renee's voice a register higher than usual, tight at the edges. "Where are you? Do you know what's happening here right now? Do you have any idea? Charles is here. Nathan's boss is sitting at our table, and there is nothing ready. You could have at least called." Diane set her fork down and looked out at the water. "Renee," she said, and I want you to hear the voice she used, because I have heard it exactly twice in 34 years. And both times someone had confused kindness for compliance. It was clear, unhurried, entirely finished negotiating. "I told you I couldn't do it alone. I said it 2 weeks before Thanksgiving." I said it again at Sunday dinner. Walter called Nathan directly. No one heard us. A pause, so we thought about ourselves instead. Silence on the line. Then that is so selfish. We'll be home Sunday, Diane said. I hope the rest of your evening goes well. She hung up. Joe refilled her wine without being asked. 20 seconds later, my phone rang. Nathan, I answered. He didn't speak right away. I could hear him outside, the muffled noise of the party behind a closed door, and then just the backyard and the wind. Dad. His voice had changed. The defensive edge was gone entirely. What was left underneath was quieter. The sound of a man who has stopped performing and started feeling. I don't know what to say. I knew it was too much. I kept telling myself it would be fine, that you'd both just, and I didn't say anything when I should have. He stopped. I'm sorry, Dad. Tell Mom I'm sorry. I believed him. Nathan has never once been dishonest with me. He had chosen the easier path, kept quiet to avoid a conflict, let a thing slide because confrontation felt expensive. But that is a failure of courage, not a failure of character. There is a difference, and it matters enormously which one you're looking at, because one of them can be repaired, and the other one usually can't. And I had made the identical failure myself, earlier in this very story, on a Thursday night over a dog and a trip to Cabo. He came by it honestly. He learned it from me. I know, I said. We'll talk when we're home, Sunday. Go take care of your guests. Is the food good? He asked. I looked at the plate in front of me. The crisp chicken, the buttered potatoes, the warm porch, and my wife across the table, relaxed for the first time in 3 weeks, with the amber Florida light coming in behind her. It's wonderful, I said. Joe made her grandmother's chicken. A pause. Good. I could hear him almost steady himself. Good, Dad. Go, I said. Sunday. After I set the phone down, Diane looked at me across the table. I picked up my fork. Roast chicken, she said. Yes, I said. Please. Nathan told us the rest of it over the following days. Charles Whitfield stayed 2 hours. He was the kind of man whose warmth is always precisely proportional to how well a situation is going. Not cold when things went wrong, just measured, giving somewhat less of himself. He ate a rotisserie chicken without complaint. He complimented the centerpiece, which genuinely deserved it. At some point, Denise said quietly to Nathan, Your parents usually cook, don't they? Are they all right? Nathan said we'd had a prior commitment we couldn't move, which was true. Renee, from across the table, said there had been a last-minute change of plans. Also true, depending entirely on your definition of last minute. The two explanations didn't line up by about 45 degrees, the way improvised stories never do when two people are solving the same problem from different angles and haven't had a chance to compare notes. Alicia had given up on the green bean casserole and was sitting at the end of the table next to Marcus. At one point she looked down the length of it at her sister and said, quietly but perfectly clearly, Mel, you should have asked them properly. Renee said, Don't start. Alicia didn't start, but she held the look for a moment, steady, level, the expression of a younger sister who has finally exhausted the benefit of the doubt, and then she went back to her dinner. Guests left by 5. Earlier than a holiday dinner usually ends. Earlier than it would have ended with a real turkey in a kitchen that had been running since dawn, and the particular warmth that builds up in a house when someone has been cooking in it all day. That warmth is not a metaphor, it is a physical thing. Everyone feels it and almost nobody names it, and its absence is felt just as precisely, even by people who could not tell you what is missing. After everyone left, Nathan did the dishes. He told me that was the first time he had ever washed up after a large family meal. Diane had always done it. I'd helped sometimes, but she had always done it. Standing at the sink, Renee came in and told him he should have called us more. He turned off the water. He said, I did call them. They told me it was too much. A pause. You knew? Yeah, Nathan said. I knew. He turned the water back on. Renee left the kitchen. She didn't post any photographs that evening. Not the centerpiece, not the table before the food came out. She had taken several earlier in the day. They stayed in her camera roll. Charles Whitfield's next message to Nathan was a routine Monday note about a project timeline. He did not mention Thanksgiving at all. That was all. That was the entire consequence, professionally speaking. Which is worth noticing because Renee had constructed 3 weeks of pressure, a 14-item list, and a 5A start time on top of an event that turned out to have almost no weight in it. She had made my wife carry a wall that wasn't holding anything up. We flew home Sunday afternoon. Ohio was gray and drizzling, that specific November gray the Midwest specializes in, not dramatic enough to be interesting. Just a low ceiling of cloud that makes you deeply appreciate having spent 4 days somewhere with bougainvillea and pelicans in it. The car pulled into our driveway, and Nathan was sitting on the front steps. Not his house, ours. He had driven 40 minutes to sit on our steps without calling ahead. That told me he had thought about it long enough to conclude that a phone call was not sufficient. Which is, I think, the first fully grown decision I ever watched my son make. He stood up when I came up the walk. We looked at each other. He looked tired in the way people do, when they have been honest with themselves about something for the first time, and it has cost them sleep. Renee didn't come, he said. Okay, I said. We went inside. Diane had come up the walk ahead of me and the kettle was already on. The 3 of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the note had been 4 days earlier. The same seats we had used for 30 years, Nathan said. I knew it was too much and I said nothing. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. I let Mel treat you both like you'd just be there. And I convinced myself that was okay. He stopped. It wasn't. No, I said. It wasn't. He looked at me. I think he had expected more scaffolding around the truth, some softening, some fatherly rounding of the edges. I didn't have any to offer him. Love that arrives pre-softened isn't love, it's management. Diane put her hand over his on the table. We love you, she said. That is not in question, but we will not be made invisible for someone else's convenience, not even for yours. I hear you, Nathan said. Good, Diane said, and she poured the tea. We sat there a while without filling the silence. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after something true has been said and actually received. The quiet on the other side of a real conversation, when everyone in the room has finally stopped performing. It was the best 30 minutes we had spent together in 2 years. Nathan sitting on our front steps without calling ahead. That's the part that stayed with me. The moment when someone stops explaining and simply shows up. Let me ask you, have you ever had a moment where someone finally heard you, after a long stretch of not being heard? Tell me in the comments. And if this story has meant something to you today, pass it along to someone who might need it. Renee called on Monday, I answered. I want you to know, she said, that what you did was really hurtful. Renee, I said, I understand it felt that way. And I'd like you to understand that when you send someone a 14-item list and call it a family invitation, that's hurtful too. We can talk about this honestly, or we can leave it here. Your choice, a silence. Then she hung up. She called back 2 days later. This time she talked less and listened more. She asked how the trip was. She said Sarasota sounded nice. She said she'd been thinking. She did not apologize in those words. But she asked questions for the first time in 2 years. Questions instead of instructions. And I recognized that as the closest thing to an opening we were going to get. You take the opening you're given. You don't hold out for the apology you scripted, because that one is never coming. And the people who wait for it usually wait forever with their arms crossed. Diane took the second call. They talked for 11 minutes. Longer, she told me afterward, than they had ever talked without Renee handing her a task. There was no grand resolution. Nobody wept and understood each other perfectly and pledged to become different people. That is not how it works, and any story that tells you otherwise is selling you something. What changed was more functional than that, and more durable. An assumption had been removed. The assumption that our time, our labor, and our willingness were simply available. Indefinitely, on demand, standing inventory, that was gone. And without it, things had to be negotiated, which meant they had to be talked about, which meant that everyone involved had to start behaving like a person with actual choices, addressing other people with actual choices. That was enough. That was more than enough. Nathan started calling more, asking questions instead of updating us on decisions already made. Small things that added up the way small things do, in both directions. Diane signed up for a container gardening class at the community center. Tuesdays, 10 to noon. She had wanted to for over a year and kept putting it off because there was always something someone else needed first. There is always something someone else needs first. That is the entire mechanism. It doesn't require a villain. It only requires a person who never says no and a world that notices. We booked Sarasota again for March. Joe was already planning which botanical garden we would visit. One Saturday morning I put on the navy apron and made Dutch apple pancakes from scratch, just for the two of us. Diane poured coffee and sat at the counter. We did not talk about Renee or Nathan or Thanksgiving or any of it. We just had breakfast. I stood at that stove in the apron with the old flour smear on the pocket, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. The two of us in this kitchen on a Saturday morning with absolutely nowhere to be. About a week after we got back from Florida, Diane was reorganizing the hall closet and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. My handwriting on the lid, photos, miscellaneous. We brought it to the kitchen table and opened it together, the usual archaeology of a shared life. Birthday parties from the 90s. Nathan at 9 years old, holding up a fish with the pride of a man who has achieved something permanent. A church picnic neither of us could date. Near the bottom, Diane held up a photograph. It was a Thanksgiving 8 or 9 years ago. I could tell from how the kitchen looked before we repainted. She was at the stove. I was standing behind her, arms loose around her shoulders, my cheek tilted toward her hair. We were both laughing. I have no idea at what. I don't remember being photographed, but I remember the feeling exactly. Being there, not watching from a comfortable distance, not stepping in for the moments that required me and retreating for all the rest. Just in it, for all of it, because that was where I wanted to be, and because she should not be alone in that kitchen, and because she had never once asked me to be there. That last part is the important part. She never asked, which made it more important, not less. That was the thing Renee never understood, and the thing Nathan had forgotten somewhere along the way and had to relearn the hard way on a Thursday morning in a freezer aisle. You don't send someone you love a work order, you show up. Diane put the photograph in a small frame and set it on the kitchen shelf next to the juice glass. We stood looking at it for a moment. We should have gone to Florida years ago, she said. We were exactly where we should have been, I said. Until we weren't, she looked at me. That's very philosophical for a Tuesday. I'm a deep man, Diane, she laughed. And I thought, that is what the 34 years were for, not to produce Thanksgiving dinners for networking events. To produce this, the two of us in our kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, laughing at something small, with nowhere on earth we had to be. I've had a lot of time since then to sit with what actually happened. And I want to leave you with what I've learned, because I don't think this story is really about a turkey. Here is the first thing. There is a difference between being needed and being used, and the difference is almost never in the work itself. It is in the asking. Diane would have cooked for 25 people gladly. She has done it. She has loved doing it. She has stood at that stove until her back ached and called it one of the good days of her life. What broke it was not the labor. It was that nobody asked. When you stop asking a person, you have stopped seeing them as a person. You have reclassified them as a resource. And resources do not get consulted, they get allocated. The moment somebody skips the question, they have told you exactly what you are to them, and you should believe them the first time. Here is the second thing, and this one is harder because it's about me. For years I watched this happen and I said, "Well, it's fine." She says it's fine. I told myself I was respecting my wife's choices. I was not. I was avoiding a conversation. There is a very thin wall between respecting someone's autonomy and using their patience as an excuse for your own cowardice, and I lived on the wrong side of that wall for a long time. My son learned his silence from somewhere. He learned it from a man who folded on a Thursday night over a dog and told himself it was fine. If you are watching someone you love get slowly ground down, and you are staying quiet because speaking up would be uncomfortable, you are not being kind. You are being comfortable. Those are not the same thing. And the person being ground down is paying for your comfort in a currency you will never see the invoice for. Here is the third thing. A boundary is not a punishment. We did not go to Florida to teach Renee a lesson. If we had, it would have been revenge. And revenge is a thing you do to someone. What we did was leave a room we were being used in. That is a thing you do for yourself. The distinction sounds like semantics until you are standing in it, and then it is the whole world. The lesson she learned was not administered by us. It was administered by reality, by the frozen turkey that needed 4 days, by the restaurants that closed their books in October, by the simple arithmetic of a job that had always been done by a person who was no longer available to do it. We didn't punish anyone. We just stopped absorbing the consequences of a decision that wasn't ours. Everything else was physics. Here is the fourth thing, and it's the one I'd want you to keep if you keep only one. Most people who take you for granted are not villains. Renee is not a villain. She is a woman who found an arrangement that worked and stopped examining it, which is a thing every single one of us does, in some room of our lives right now. The convenience became invisible to her. That is what convenience does. It disappears, and then you build on top of it, and you never once check whether the thing you're standing on ever agreed to hold you. When it moves, you're genuinely shocked. Not because you're cruel, because you had honestly forgotten there was a person under there. Which is somehow worse, and also, mercifully, fixable, because a person who has forgotten can be reminded. And my son was reminded, and he did the dishes, and he drove 40 minutes to sit on our steps in the cold without calling first. And here is the last thing. Diane taught second grade for 28 years, and she used to tell me that the hardest lesson in that room was never letters or numbers. It was teaching a child that they are allowed to want something, that their preference counts, that they can say, "I don't want to," and the world does not end. She spent 28 years teaching that to other people's children. At 60, in a kitchen in Ohio, with a phone in her hand and a 14-item list on the screen, she finally taught it to herself. If you've ever been handed a list instead of an invitation, this story is for you. You do not have to explain your absence to people who never noticed your presence. So here is my question. Have you ever set a boundary that felt like a risk, and then felt immediately, unmistakably right the second you set it? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you're sitting with something right now, trying to decide between staying quiet and finally speaking up, I hope Walter and Diane's Thanksgiving helped you make up your mind. If it did, subscribe to my channel. There are more stories like this one waiting for you, and I'd like you with us for them. Everything you just heard was written by a human being, not generated, not assembled, not optimized. I wrote it at a kitchen table of my own, over several evenings, Going back and changing a word here and a word there because a sentence didn't sound the way a person sounds. I do that because I think these stories are about actual human dignity, and it would be a strange thing to talk about dignity in a voice nobody lived behind. The details have been changed to protect the people in them. The feeling has not been changed at all. Everything I said about what it costs to be the person who never says no, and about what it costs to stay quiet while they pay it, that comes from somewhere. It usually does. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.